Hi, I'm Eric Ford for Made Here. The newest film from Vermonter Ian Sweet focuses on the Green River Reservoir, which sits just north of Hyde Park in Lamoille County. It's a pristine body of water, full of wildlife and bountiful fishing, which attracts thousands of visitors every year. Ian's film looks at the history of this natural resource and its future in light of climate change, economics, and land use. You can watch Green River Reservoir and other great Made Here films streaming on our website and through the PBS app. Enjoy the film, and thanks for watching.
When the noise of the world is too much to bear, there's a place you can go with clean air. It's the wind in the pines and the song of the loon calling for you, calling for you. Oh, Green River, seed of our soul. Oh, Green River, won't you take us home? Dip your oar in the water, watch the ripples float, cast your line, sons and daughters, in the evening glow, and the birds mark the seasons, and the stars shine above, calling for you, calling for you. Seed of our soul. Oh, Green River, won't you take us home? May it stay this way forever, may it shine, may it stay this way forever, yours and mine. May it stay this way forever, may it shine, may it stay this way forever, yours and mine.
It's quite an interesting long history. They built the dam for multiple purposes. As far back, I think the earliest one I saw was 1917. People had recognized the importance of the area and were investing in it by buying up the land before anything was actually in process. So then what happened was Green Mountain Power, who actually then, eventually took over Central Vermont Public Service, but they consolidated the land, and they then decided to move ahead with this construction of this dam. And the two purposes were, they were thinking about long-term power production, and then the other thing was flood control. But it was much later that then they finally put in, they had plans for actually 2 electrical production facilities on the Green River, one of them which they built initially with a 1.8 megawatt generator, and then they were going to put a bigger facility slightly down the stream, a mile and a half. There used to be a little hamlet called Garfield, and now it's mostly all gone, and they never built that, and that was going to be twice as big. But eventually, Morrisville Water and Light took control of the property, and they ran that successfully for quite a while, doing logging and letting anybody use it. You know, it was open for anybody to come and camp, and it got to be fairly popular after a while. So the people that were using it, like Bill Bartlett and others, decided that, you know, this was a great asset that we ought to spend some time and get the state to be interested in it and set it up as a park so we wouldn't have it trashed by people indiscriminately camping everywhere.
My husband and I, Bill Bartlett, and we discovered Green River Reservoir, I'd say in '74, and there was no one there. It was a totally deserted sort of a place. We discovered a couple of the islands, and we'd go up, and we'd then take our basset hound and pile him into the canoe, and we'd go out to one of the islands and we'd camp. So it was really from that time forward that we actively used the reservoir. And it was from that long involvement that the Friends of Green Reservoir developed, actually.
When I moved to Vermont, I had already had about 9,000 miles of open boat paddling. The Green River Reservoir was much more wild, wilderness-like than it is now.
Water and Light put a barrier across the entrance to the reservoir there with multiple layers of heavy-duty cable that was attached to the utility pole. And that worked because nobody's going to want to saw through that with their chainsaw.
The leadership of Morrisville Water and Light to put a gate at the top of the ramp, back to where the kiosk is now. So it meant that motorboats were not allowed. However it came about, it was truly one of the most extraordinary gifts that Morrisville Water and Light leadership gave, almost maybe unknowingly, to the community and to northern Vermont, and to all of us who really value paddling on bodies of water that are largely undeveloped and without any motorboats. So I had already been here for 20 years paddling on the reservoir. I had also, at that point in 1990, I'd known Bill for about 15, 18 years. So we met in 72, 73. And well, we began noticing that the use of the Green River Reservoir was ramping up. And at that time, Morrisville Water and Light's approach to management was hands-off. They had the gate and no motorboats, and that was good enough. It really was good enough. So users were unregulated, and we noticed that campsites were popping up everywhere, and people were going to the bathroom in the woods and leaving toilet paper and their human manure, either because there were no outhouses. There was nothing there. Bill Bartlett's life work around water quality, the reason that the quality of water is what it is in the state of Vermont is largely because of Bill, who was a fierce advocate for keeping Vermont's waters clean. I personally mapped with a small group of people every single campsite, and we located campsites, and we noted the size of each of those campsites. So we measured the perimeter of the impact.
So we just, as a group, started going up in the fall, and then we'd go back up in the spring just to clean things up, and decided, well, we're doing this and we'll call ourselves the Friends of Green River. And became more actively involved with working with Morrisville Water and Light, letting them know, we were cleaning it up and doing that, and that was fine. And the Forest and Parks, the Agency of Natural Resources, had been interested in buying Green River Reservoir for years, but it had never, in terms of everything they do, it was way down the list, so it didn't, And Forest and Parks, to this day, is still terribly underfunded, and they have issues trying to take care of what they already have as parks. So it wasn't there, ooh, let's buy it, let's buy it. But I was into my political career in the Senate, and was also on the Appropriations Committee, and for many years chairs of Appropriations. So I said, well, let's see if we can bump this a little further up the list. And had some conversations with the state, and they were certainly interested in it at that time, not necessarily having it be a state park, but at least getting it purchased. So as many things happen in small communities, I had a conversation with the then chair of Morrisville Water and Light, and said, I think we can come up with a package deal, and we could buy this. Are you guys really interested? Would you like to do it? And he said, let me talk to his board. So he talked to his board, and they said yes. And Natural Resources Council, they had the money, and so we sort of quietly just got the deal done, and it got purchased. Senator Leahy was always a tremendous champion of making sure that organizations that particularly helped with conservation in this state had access and would get federal funds into them, so that the money was there. And as always, Senator Leahy came through and helped them come up with the missing dollars, so that they were able to have the cash to do the deal.
We are a conservation organization existing really just to preserve the wilderness-like qualities of Green River Reservoir, which we all feel very passionately about. We're all people involved in paddling and camping there. We were formed when that land was sold, was coming up for sale, and we very much wanted it to be a state park. So we did absolutely everything we could do to help the other conservation organizations that were pulling it together. Since then, our primary goal has been to do whatever we can to help preserve the reservoir and support the state park in ways that we can.
Here's a local gem, and state resources just really aren't sufficient to manage it and take care of it properly. So local folks and users of it step up to the plate, and again we already had the organization, the Friends of Green River, but to be able to raise money to help pay for some of the initial staff, to help pay for building the buildings, just all those sorts of things that they've been able to turn Green River into a lovely state park.
The Agency of Natural Resources includes 3 departments: the Department of Environmental Conservation, where most of our regulatory programs are housed, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And within FPR, we have the staff responsible for managing Vermont's 55 staff state parks.
In the Northeast here, I have 18 staffed locations. And I'm primarily responsible for the parks from the summit of Mansfield East and Barry North. Green River Reservoir fits into Northeast state parks, or into the state park system as a whole. It's one of our, one of the gems of the state park system. It's a very unique and special location. It's quite different than most of our other more developed campgrounds. What we have here is a focus on maintaining the wilderness-like characteristics of the location. And providing opportunities for dispersed outdoor recreation.
So we see about 18,000 visitors to the Green River Reservoir State Park each year, both as campers as well as day users. It is a well-beloved fishery, and just this incredible surface water body without motorized craft. And it's one of the few in the state, and so no, it is at the top of many paddlers' lists of favorite places to go.
So the Friends became an advisor to the state on operations, on facilities, on programming, and we helped support the state with money, with master planning at no charge. We became involved with some of the early design of the moldering of the composting toilets. We designed and helped pay for the contact station. I designed the middle parking lot and the boardwalk that is the accessible trail, the kiosk. Equally important, we became involved with the protection of the view shed within the land that can be seen from the waters of the reservoir during the summer months. We became an instrument of support for the state, and in return, the state agreed to meet with us twice a year to really promote the educational opportunities that the park staff have with virtually every single visitor about why it's so important to not have motorboats, or to be quiet when you're paddling, or to take care of your campsite, to clean up, to use the moldering toilets, to value the place that Bill and many of us had known from the early 70s through the 90s, when there was such a huge proliferation, unregulated proliferation of use.
I make sure that all the daily chores get done, reservations. I make sure all the financial tasks we have to do stay up to date, and just, manage the general staff here. It's one of the few parks where all of the sites are remote. You can only reach them by canoe or kayak or paddleboard these days. We have a lot of paddleboarders.
First and foremost, it's like keeping the attendants safe and well prepared for the day, and really trying to pass on some knowledge, and hopefully that trickles down into the guests, and just keep everything going in the background as best as I can, and hope everyone, the guests and the staff included, are having a good summer.
We check every campsite. We make sure there's no what we call micro trash, bottle caps or pull tabs. We clean the fire pits. We check the composting toilet to make sure that it's, everything's clean up there. We keep buckets of sawdust or wood shavings at each site.
Yeah, people want that. They want to go out, and they want to have a wilderness-like experience. Some people want that quiet. They want the solitude. They want to listen to the loons. In a more developed campground, sometimes you have a little more noise. While all of our campgrounds, there's typically not a whole lot of issues with people, but it's more of a family scene, and there'll be kids riding bikes and people having fun and barbecues and stuff like that. But this place is for the people that want to go out and really experience being in a more remote area.
The Green River Reservoir State Park is absolutely one of the gems for loon habitat, partly because of all the bays and islands. Loons like to have their own little 70 to 100 acre zones for territories. And it's one of the places we've had a long-term pair since 1978. The population in the state bottomed out in 1983 with 12 pairs. One of those was the northwest site at Green River. They're pretty steady throughout the 80s and 90s, and then in the early 2000s, a second pair formed on Green River, and then in just after 2010, 2 more pairs have now formed. Really only 2 of the pairs are productive, being very successful on their island sites, producing chicks consistently. The other 2 still haven't quite figured it out. Partly the habitat's not quite so good, and also competition is starting to play a factor, with the loons sort of intermingling with each other, and that can interfere with nesting, whether they nest or not. It can interfere with nest success. It can interfere with chicks' survivorship as well. But overall, those, especially the Access Cove and the Northwest Cove now, are consistently producing chicks, maybe not every year, but quite often. And it's also become a kind of a little central hub where you get non-breeders flying in, hanging out. And so in the middle of the reservoir, you'll often see a group of 8 to 10 loons just kind of checking each other out. Some of those are the pairs, part of the pairs from the reservoir itself, coming out and joining that group. Others are flying in from nearby ponds. And that's part of loon life, is always sort of assessing territories, assessing each other, getting to know the neighbors. So it's just been a super great spot and it's all natural nesting. We do put nest warning signs out because of all the canoe and kayak traffic, and just essentially asking boaters to stay 50 to 100 feet away from the nest sites. That just gives them a little breathing room during their most vulnerable time. When they're out in the water, they can just kind of swim around and there's nothing really that's going to bother them too much. They kind of know what's a threat and what's not a threat. But when they're on the nest, they can't fly from land. And so to feel safe, they often would get into the water if a threat came nearby, whether it's a person or whether it's an eagle, they might get off. So eagles are going to be an interesting factor over the next decade, see how they influence nest success and chick survivorship. But it's also one of the places where loons have become very habituated to kayak and canoe traffic. So oftentimes they'll bring their chicks right up near people and they can just get a really amazing look. Is that from here? Yeah, cool. So we are on Zach Woods Pond right now, and we've been watching 2 chicks, and now that's the second adult coming in. It's been on its own over in that corner. So really another little special gem, which is a part of the Green River State Park. We used to think that loons mated for life. That was back in the 1980s before we figured out a way to tag loons, put color bands on their legs. But since that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, some techniques came along to be able to successfully capture loons and put color bands, and we could look at return rates. And through that work, we've discovered that about 80% of the time it's the same male and female returning every year. But about 20% of the time there's a switch in the mates. Some of that's mortality. Some of it's a loon might move to a different part of a lake for unknown reasons or another lake nearby. And then the other one is these switches in mates where you actually get a territorial challenge. And I was talking about those groups of loons out on Green River. Well, that's part of what's happening is they're assessing each other. And is that pair prone to a takeover, or is that pair really strong and leave them alone? And so they're communicating that all the time, both vocally, through the calls, through the male yodel, but also visually, through little interactions and head bobbing and diving and posturing. That's all sort of saying, who's strong, who's not, and if those intruder loons, extra loons, might be game for a takeover, and you'll actually see chases and challenges and maybe a fight. But oftentimes it never gets to that level. It's more of a communication thing. So those non-breeders are always kind of, again, assessing territories, and they'll, when a chick returns to the area, they usually spend 3 or 4 years on the ocean. They'll come back to their natal lake area, but not often, maybe not to the same lake. But then they'll spend 3, 4, 5 years investigating the region before they actually find a spot to nest. They don't nest on average until they're 6, 7, 8 years of age. And a loon might get kicked off a territory and then have to look for a new one. So that there's just all of this interaction going on, which is a kind of a neat thing about loons, is we can watch that and be part of that all the time. It's easier if they're marked loons and you know who's who, but we only have a few birds marked in Vermont. So when a bird finally finds a spot in a territory, they'll mate up. The average marriage of a loon is about 4 or 5 years before there's a switch in one of those mates. Sometimes there's a switch right away because the pair's weak or something's wrong or there's a really strong intruder. But other pairs might last for 10, 15, and in one case out in Michigan, there's a pair that's been together over 20 years. So why do loons only lay 1 or 2 eggs compared to a merganser might have 7 or more eggs? It's a different life strategy. Loons are super involved in the parental care, and they'll care for their chicks right up into October, even November in some cases. And when you have that length of commitment to the chicks, they tend to only have 1 or 2 young. Eagles are that way as well. But the survivorship is really high relative to the number of eggs that have been laid. So in Vermont, we've been seeing about 70%, even 75% chick survivorship rate. Whereas survivorship of the type of bird that lays 10 eggs is really low. They're hoping to at least get 1 or 2 or 3 of those to survive. So it's a different strategy. Where do you invest? For loons, they invested in parenting. Both male and female share in every activity equally, and that includes nest incubation. It also includes feeding the young, defending the young, and caring for the young. Both the male and female are involved in every process equally. It's just really neat to see, but kind of both the male and female out there. You can't tell the male and female apart visually, except that males are bigger than the female. Loons were adapted to be swimmers and flyers. but they're not land creatures. Their legs are in the back of their body, so they can't actually walk on land. They can kind of shuffle on their bellies. They can raise up to turn an egg, and then they flop right back down again. And that's one reason why they nest 1, 2, maybe 3 feet from the shoreline. And so they can easily like pop into the water when a threat comes near, whether that's a raccoon or a fox, or whether that's a human in a boat. They feel safe in the water. They do not feel safe on the land. If you come across a nest and it's not marked, we don't put signs around all nests, that loon might hunker down and put its head out and sort of lie in a prone position. It's sort of getting out of bird shape. So a predator is often focused in on the bird shape of the head, or it's focused on movement. Whereas if a loon lays real flat, it becomes a stick. And that zebra coloring, the black and white, you mix in a few grasses, it can be really hard to see a loon sitting on a nest in that position. So loons in Vermont are doing really well. A conservation standpoint is to maintain that. And so part of our effort is to work with volunteers. So the folks at the state park, the Friends of Green River Reservoir, and they become kind of the eyes and ears of watching the pair and educating other people. I'm kind of a coordinator of all of that, and loons are such an icon.
When I got my first Pentax camera in 1970, and I've been doing photography ever since. Loon monitoring, I began that in 2010 because that forces me to get out early in the morning when the waters are relatively calm and when there's better chances of seeing wildlife. So I'm always carrying this camera and a telephoto lens with me. I put it in this waterproof case here until I get into my kayak. If I can get out there when the chicks are just newly born, that's when I get the greatest pictures. And by knowing when they nest, because I report that to Eric Hansen, and then he lets Water and Light know, and they try to maintain the water level. So by that, the gestation period is about 28 days. So then I try to time expected hatch to some of my trips. And if I'm lucky, I get there just on the day they've hatched or the day after that and get some good pictures. All wildlife is attractive to me, from the insects all the way up to the deer and moose. Numerous kinds of ducks, including wood ducks, which I think are really beautiful. The mergansers with their babies. There's always geese. An occasional hawk. Sometimes in the fall or spring, I'll get a migratory bird that just happens to be there, like Bonaparte's gull that I got a great picture of a couple of years ago in flight flying right toward me. In the early spring, there'll be a lot of tree swallows flying around. This time of year, you'll see a lot of phoebes swooping down over the water to get insects and back up to an overhang or something like that. There's always something of interest. Well, I've got lots of great shots of beavers in all stages, including just the tail going up in the air. I don't think they're a great threat to the loons. Snapping turtles might be a little larger threat, but the biggest threat is probably the bald eagle. A few years ago, one of the kayakers actually observed the bald eagle taking one of the chicks out of the water. What's so special about it is being quiet waters. No motorboats around. You can swim way out and not have to worry about it. And when I'm out there doing my photography, I can cruise quietly into those areas where I traditionally see wildlife and not scare them and be able to photograph them. The highlight is probably that picture of the loon with 2 chicks on the back that I got in 2015. That's the only one I've gotten with 2 chicks. It's quite rare. Most often it will be one on the back and one in the water.
So this is the Vermont Forest Bird Monitoring Project. We started this in 1989, I think with 6 study sites around the state. And we now have about 30 study sites around the state. And these are sites that are monitored primarily by volunteers. And they consist of 5 point counts separated by about 200 meters each. And the observers visit these sites every year during the height of the breeding season in June and survey birds for 10 minutes at each point. And all of our study sites are located in interior forests, so they're away from edges, impacts of development and roadsides and things that can affect bird populations. So these are interior forest sites, and most of them, almost all of them, are sites that are free from any kind of forest management. So there's no timber harvests or any kind of forest management going on. So that eliminates one variable that can affect bird populations and sort of confound the determination of long-term trends and what's going on with forest birds. And that's the whole reason why we started it, to get to monitor bird populations over time and track population trends to see how these birds are doing. There are a few species that are declining and continue to decline and have been declining since the beginning, Canada warbler being one of them. We have documented a decline in the overall abundance of the forest birds that we've been studying for these 30 plus years. But there are certainly a number of species that stay here for the winter, woodpeckers and chickadees. Blue jays, a number. And there's also the species who are short distance migrants who may only go to the mid-Atlantic states, and then we may get birds from Canada who just come to this area for the winter. So the blue jays we see here in the summer might not be the blue jays we're seeing here in the winter. When we started the project, there's no end date, it's just long-term monitoring, and the hope is it will continue for the long term.
This site is, as Steve mentioned, part of the Forest Bird Monitoring Program at VCE. And this summer, it's been one of the sites, along with other Forest Bird Monitoring Program sites across northern and north central Vermont, that we've been surveying as part of this larger maple study, of which VCE, Audubon Vermont, and a team at the University of Vermont are part. This summer has really been to look at untapped, unmanaged forest stands to compare with previously surveyed sites that were active sugar bushes in 2020, 2021, and 2022. So those years we were doing all the same surveys, all the same protocols, looking at birds, looking at vegetation, and looking at arthropods, which are insects and a number of other basically creepy crawly groups that are bird food. So we were looking at those in sugar bushes and now those in unmanaged northern hardwood forest stands. Basically, maple, not a shocker for any Vermonters watching, is a big industry here in Vermont. It's expanding to the point where we're getting Wall Street investment in sugaring. And so I think there's a lot of concern, both amongst the public, but also at the sort of regulatory level, of what impacts may this have as we're converting forests that are either unmanaged or managed for wildlife goals, or are managed for timber and other wood products production. What is the impact if we're converting those stands over to sugar bush, if there are any? I think foresters have a practitioner's understanding of the realities of what that means, but the way that science works is that if no one's tested it or looked at it through a scientific approach, and it's not published in the peer-reviewed literature, science doesn't know it to be true. And so basically this study with Audubon Vermont and VCE is looking to see what are the impacts that maple sugaring has on our forests and our forest birds, and how effective is Audubon Vermont's bird-friendly maple program at potentially mitigating some of those what we don't know are negative impacts, but could be negative impacts on birds.
I moved here to northern Vermont 51 years ago, and I was hired on as a game warden. And after a year of training, I was assigned to Lamoille County as the field warden here. And Red Franklin Hooper was the warden that had been here since 1933. And I was going to take over for him because he was about to retire at age 70. One of the first places that Red took me was up on Green River Reservoir. And I saw the first loons, and I just fell in love with that reservoir. So I've been involved with the reservoir ever since. One of my favorite places to patrol. I'd go up there and canoe, and I'd check fishermen and talk to campers, and just really enjoy that whole area. When I first got here, it was primary pickerel and perch. There was the biologists, when they did a survey a few years after I got here, also found that there was a good population of suckers, but people rarely catch them and they're down pretty deep. So folks would troll for pickerel and ice fish for perch, but there was no bass at that time. And we had a lot of back and forth with the biologists and decided that it would be great to introduce bass into Green River Reservoir. So we, the first year, and this would have been, I'd say mid-70s, something around there, they netted some bass over Hardwick Way, Nelson Pond, Mack Pond, that area, and brought them over, and I think it was like 250 bass, different sizes, and released them. And then the next year they got a bunch of fry, I think from New York State, and put them in. And that fishery just took off. It was really a tremendous bass fishery. People started to learn about it and were coming. Evening fishing with topwater lures was great. Fly fishing for them, particularly at early season, was really fun. And it was very popular fishing there. So I had lots of folks to talk to when I'd go up there on patrol. They were using it then more as a storage facility for water. And when they needed more water at their facilities downstream on the Lamoille River, they would release. And sometimes that would be a significant amount of water going downstream.
We're on Garfield Road that the Green River runs under. And when we only open one tube, the paddlers feel like it's not quite enough water. If we open two, we threaten to wipe that culvert out. We are totally open to working on releases as is currently contained in the water quality permit. Recreational use is a good and viable thing. And we want to have all partners be good partners. We want everyone to be able to move forward together.
So the Green River outside of Morrisville, Vermont, it's about 3 miles of whitewater that we kind of pay attention to. And it goes down into the Lamoille right where it crosses under Route 15. It's about Class 3, 4, and a couple Class 5 rapids, and it sits in a pristine, remote area that is pretty unique for Vermont. I've been paddling the Green River somewhere along 2012, 2013, a couple years after they did the flow study, and they figured out that they could get dam releases on it. And then we would kind of go up. We'd get 5-6 days a year where they'd let us know that we can go paddle it, and typically we'd have a pretty good turnout. Sometimes, you get 15 boaters, sometimes you get 40. If you can know about it in advance and it's the right weekend, you can get a pretty good turnout. So usually there has to be enough water in the reservoir. They are either doing a fall drawdown and trying to bring the reservoir height to a certain height before winter. Same thing could be in the spring after all the snow is melted and filled the reservoir. Or we get a big rainstorm and they know they need to dump water to keep it at a certain height. I know they're pretty particular about the loon nesting up there. There's a lot of that going on and they like to have a certain water level. And what's really special about the Green is, say we get a big storm on Tuesday, and Vermont kayaking is like, you better go kayaking now because it just rained and you have a day or two. But with the Green, that rain could have fallen on Tuesday and they could let us know, hey, we need to dump water this Saturday and Sunday, we'll do a release. And having that ability to have it planned makes it a very unique and special thing. Kayaking is class 1 through 5. Class 1, kind of moving water, a little bit of ripples. 2 is a little harder. 3, some action, but still relatively straightforward. Class 4 gets a little more challenging, and you have to be able to pick your path. Maybe you should have a whitewater, roll where you can flip back up. And Class 5 is pretty full-on waterfalls and not much room for error. So the Green it's a majority Class 4 run, and there's 3 drops that Class 5, and you can walk around them if you want, or you can kayak them. And so the Class 5 drops, I'll start there because it's kind of visually the easiest thing to see. You're looking at the first one we call Moonshine, and it's a 10-foot waterfall, and it lands in a small eddy of calm water if there is any, and then it's very involved once you go from there. So it takes a lot of skill, to be online, hit the drop, and then paddle away. And there's a lot of, there's a moderate amount of consequence if you don't, Other things that could create a Class 5 rapid are hazards, such as undercuts, strainers and siphons, so where water might go through, but a person couldn't, if that makes sense. There's a drop in the middle of the run called Young Buck that gets run, but more often gets portage because there's strainers and some siphons. But it's an easy, just kind of get out of your boat, walk around, look at that, and then you get on with the rest of the run. And then Class 4 is, we're in our boats more, just kind of, we can probably look over the horizon line and see that it's okay. And it's moving a little bit slower paced, and the lines aren't as hard to hit. So think of it, you go to a ski resort and you see a blue square, a diamond, and a double black diamond. Once you've done it a few times, it's pretty easy to see, standing at the top, what you're getting yourself into.
The Agency of Natural Resources has an important role in the relicensing of dams. We are specifically responsible for reviewing hydropower relicensing initiatives to ensure that they comply with the state's water quality standards, which is a set of chemical and physical requirements that all projects in the state need to comply with. We license hydropower facilities generally for 30 to 50-year terms. That's different than almost any other permit issued by this agency, which generally has a 5-year term. So Morrisville Water and Light is operating under a license that was issued shortly after the initial Clean Water Act. And certainly our knowledge and goals for environmental protection have continued to evolve over the past decades, and that's also reflected in the 401 certification we issued for this project. And I think, it looks new, and so Morrisville has had more questions maybe than we would expect in a traditional regulatory process that occurred on a 5-year interval. So these are complicated undertakings. They have several parties, the Morrisville Water and Light, the agency, as well as FERC. There are appeals processes that Morrisville has availed themselves of at different points in the process that have certainly slowed things down. And these are big, complicated undertakings.
The Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, which ultimately licensed the dam, tells the applicant, in this case Morrisville Water and Light, that they need to check with the state agency, in this case Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, to make sure that as they issue this new 40-year license, the conditions of the license are appropriate to protect water quality and uphold the state's water quality standards. And that includes issues like the health of the stream as far as its ability to provide habitat for fish and other aquatic animals. In this case, when the Agency of Natural Resources looked at the downstream condition of the dam and the condition of the habitat in the reservoir, as the dam has been operating under the old license for the last 40 years, the scientists at the state agency determined that the level of flows in the river below the dam were not appropriate for supporting healthy communities of fish, healthy reproduction of fish, as well as the life cycle of the bugs. And so the agency had determined that there needed to be some adjustments in the flow regime below the dam. The agency also looked at the health of aquatic plants and animals such as dragonflies and loons, and how they were affected by the winter drawdown of the reservoir, the amount of water that the utility was taking out of the dam during winter time in order to generate hydroelectricity. And after scientific study, not just by the agency, but the agency looked at reports that were produced by Morrisville and Water and Light's own scientists, and determined that both the amount of drawdown that was occurring in the reservoir was too much to protect the aquatic life forms in the reservoir, and also that the amount of flows that were being released from the dam and the timing and types of those flows were not appropriate to maintain healthy levels of fish and other aquatic animals as is required by state water quality standards.
Trout Unlimited nationally as an organization is very concerned with stream passage issues, of which dams certainly play a significant role. For Trout Unlimited to be involved as an intervener on any number of dam relicensing issues that may happen in Vermont, that certainly is true for the Lamoille, which is a cold water fishery. The dams that Morrisville operates are sort of a classic examples of dams where Trout Unlimited would want to be involved with creating flows that are conducive to the habitat and also to the cold water fisheries that exist there. Well, the Green River is fairly unique. It's the Green River as it exists below the dam is a very cold water fishery. The Green River Reservoir is a bottom release reservoir which consistently releases very cold water that creates a great little fishery within the Green River itself of brook trout and brown trout and some rainbow, and also as it flows into the Lamoille helps to keep the temperature moderated and cooler down below where the Green River comes in. But because of the damming of the Green River and the creation of the reservoir, it's also created a really unique cold water plume from the dam that exists for a good ways down the Lamoille as well.
Morrisville, like most hydro operators, wanted as close to a continuation of the license that they'd had for the previous 30 years. And the state typically doesn't love that idea when they think about the next advancement in water quality. Yeah, so the big issue here has been largely around what's the level of change for water quality. And early in the proceeding, when you look at the documents, everything that's referenced is the Clean Water Act demands this. Well, Congress last reauthorized the Clean Water Act in 1992. I was secretary from 1998 to 2003, so the Clean Water Act hasn't changed. So I know what the Clean Water Act said then, and so I know what it says now. So really what Vermont was arguing for was the next increment under state interest, not really the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act is very vague and it gives states a lot of room, right? So the water quality, really the sticking point is you've got a 100-foot tall dam, and both for flood protection and to generate power, there's always been around a 10-foot drawdown allowed for those purposes. And for most of the year, that goes to zero in the new permits. which means you can't really make that hydro station has a very difficult time being of any use because the way the electric system works, most of the cost for electricity is bound up in what we call peaks. So there's 13 data points a year, the peak for every month and the peak for the year. And that drives most of your cost. So hydroelectric is ideally suited because you can turn it on when those peaks are coming, lower your load, and lower everybody's cost for the whole year. Well, if you can't draw down at all, like zero for most of the year, then you're not going to be able to do anything with that. So it really diminishes the value of the hydroelectric plant when you go to the level that was contemplated, throughout that permitting process.
As we've moved through a number of these relicensing facilities, has been to look to dampen those high peaks and those lower bottoms to maintain a more consistent level of water in the channel that reflects what fish would have ideally seen under natural conditions, recognizing when it rains, flows come up, and sometimes in the summer when it's droughty, flows go way down. But to stay within that range as opposed to dramatically exceeding it or falling below it based on operations.
We can still draw down to do power. We don't do it nearly as much as we used to because we know that our new permits are going to be more restrictive. So we've been criticized in the past for playing the game to be able to draw down 10 feet. In the wintertime, we draw down like 3 feet because we actually think nobody should ever want us to draw down less than that in the wintertime because with ice buildups in the spring, it's quite possible you could wipe the dam out if you don't have anything drawn down. It's one of the things we're talking with the state about I think their current water quality permit limits us to 1 foot in the winter, and we actually think that's dangerous. It's one of the things we want analyzed in this study. Even right now, we're within 1/10 of a foot of full. In the new permit, it has to be 0.0. We're not, which I don't know how you can possibly be 0.0. We typically are a foot and a half at most, and in the wintertime a couple feet. We're nowhere near the 10 feet that's in because our current permit's still valid from the early 1980s.
The study that GEI will be undertaking for us is really a comprehensive engineering investigation of the Green River Dam facility. There has been suggestion on and off by Morrisville Water and Light that they have an interest in the state taking ownership of this facility, and we need to make sure we understand exactly what condition the dam is in before being willing to engage further in conversations about potential state ownership. This is a really significant dam, one of the largest in the state. The ongoing operation and maintenance of that facility is likely to require significant investments, and so it's something we can't enter into lightly.
When the noise of the world is too much to bear, there's a place you can go with clean air. It's the wind in the pines and the song of the loon calling for you. Calling for you. Oh, Green River, seed of our soul. Oh, Green River, won't you take us home? Dip your oar in the water, watch the ripples flow. Cast your line, sons and daughters, in the evening glow. And the birds mark the seasons, and the stars shine above, calling for you. Calling for you. take us home. May it stay this way forever. May it shine. May it stay this way forever. Yours and mine. May it stay this way forever. May it shine. May it stay this way forever. Yours and mine.
You can breathe here.
Oh, it's a cherished resource.
Here's a local gem.
It's a very unique and special location.
It kind of feels like you're in backwoods Maine, even though you're about 5 minutes from a town. So it's beautiful. It feels wild still.
One of the gems of the state park system.
The designation of the park is wilderness-like.
One of my favorite places to patrol.
That reservoir makes that so unique.
Just really enjoy that whole area.
The Green River Reservoir State Park is absolutely one of the gems for loon habitat.
What's so special about it is being quiet waters.
What we have here is a focus on maintaining the wilderness-like characteristics of the location.
Well, it's one of the most beautiful places on earth.
Vermont Public, partnering with local filmmakers to bring you stories made here. For more, visit vermontpublic.org.